Hey, what's up? This is Aerodozz. This is a new deck, Vendilion clique, mono blue control. It's a pretty decent commander, and it's probably one of the top control commanders, at least in the dual commander scene. And I'm playing against sidisi Brute Tyrant, another con commander, Sultai colors. A pretty decent commander, a little bit risky because it depends on the graveyard a lot. But luckily for him, I have little to no graveyard control. But after this game, I'm considering getting some. So a pretty keepable hand here. I see Strip Mine, Lonely Sandbar. Unfortunately, we can't get enough mana for mana drain down on turn 2. So I try to control his mana a little bit. Get a Strip Mine down. But unfortunately, it looks like he has enough mana in his hand. Even dropping a Mana Dork. I'm hoping to delay him until I get enough card advantage with the Ancestral Vision. And by now I have enough mana to counter his sidisi should he drop it. But instead, he goes for Deep Analysis, and I considered countering that, but then I don't think it's worth it. Even if I do get the extra mana from Mana Drain. Because then he'll just have the opportunity to cast sidisi next turn. So I just go ahead and Vendilion clique one of his cards away. And now I see a bunch of reanimate cards, two pretty powerful artifact creatures, Skinrender and Survival of the Fittest. And at this point, I'm really worried about the Survival of the Fittest because then he can just tutor up any card that he wants from his library. So I just go ahead and make him put that away. So for those of you who are not familiar with Vendilion clique's ability, let me just illustrate it. So when it enters the battlefield, and it has flash by the way, when it enters the battlefield you can look at any player's hand, so it can be your hand or your opponent's hand, and choose a non-land card from it, and you can have that player put it on the bottom of his library, and then that player draws a card, so you're basically replacing that non-land card with something else. So it's a pretty good control card in general, and it makes a decent commander. So I just go ahead and attack here. I just draw a bunch of lands, so I just go ahead and discard the excess mana. And he's still not casting sidisi, probably anticipating that I have a counter up. Uses Eternal Witness to get back one of his lands. I draw my second counter, so I feel like I have some leeway in what I can counter. He drops an Anime Dead here, and he targets the duplicant, so if he had targeted the Mere Battle Sphere, I would have countered it for sure, but I'm not too concerned about my commander being removed right here, since I can just cast her again. But then he does go ahead and cast his general, so I have to counter that. And I'm trying to draw some other spells, so I use Dissolve, but I just top deck a Miscalculation, and he has a lot of mana, so I'm not 100% convinced that that's a good card at this time. Now here I see Merchant Scroll, and he's getting a lot of permanents down, so I just tutor for Cyclonic Rift, hoping to use it eventually. just attacks with 2 creatures. Baleful Strix. Not too concerned about that. Dropped Cryptic Command, so that's a pretty good card to sort of tap down all his attackers, which I do end up doing right here, leaving enough mana open for mana drain. And I just draw Cage Sun right here, so I just go ahead and use that, get that extra mana off our islands. And he has a lot of creatures out at this point, but I'm not too worried because they're just 2 or 1 power creatures. But I do have to get rid of them eventually. Here I decide to go ahead and use Clique, but I forget that he has Alchemist's Refuge out, so he can cast non-land cards as though they had flash. So he just uses that while my mana is tapped out. But he only chooses to remove my commander. And the good thing about Vendilion Clique is you don't care too much about whether they're on the battlefield or not. You just use it for the ETB trigger. So if they use up a card to get rid of it, then that's not too fine. And I removed that Dread Return from his hand because then he can just cast it twice, and he's getting good value out of that. Whereas if he casts Living In, I can just counter it, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Here I see his lands are tapped out, or most of them, so I just go ahead and use Tezzeret's ability to tutor for Winter Orb. And I just use Cyclonic Rift. Get rid of all of his non-land permanents. And he animates Mirror Battlesphere here, but I choose not to counter it because I have Order of Succession in hand, which is basically a control magic when you're not controlling any creatures. And it's a sorcery, so they can't destroy an enchantment or something and get their creature back. Although I guess he could blow up Animate Debt and put it back in its graveyard. See Colony Gem here. So I decide to tutor for Mana Vault. Get that online. And here I use Order of Succession to get control of that Battlesphere. At this point he's pretty tapped out, so he goes and attacks Tezzeret. And since Tezzeret's at 1 loyalty point, he's kind of dead anyway, so I just let him go. Gain the extra life, as Master Control would say. At this point, I realized that I can just use Capsize's buyback ability to return Winter Orb to my hand at his end step, and then I can just untap all my lands and replay Winter Orb on my turn. And here he discards Wonder, which means that all his creatures have flying as long as he has an island, so he has 2 of them. So I can't really block his creatures with the Mirror Battlesphere anymore, so that means I have to go on the offensive. Here I top deck Vedalken Shackles, so Baleful Strix, which would be a pretty good blocker, is we can basically take control of that. So I just go ahead and drop Vedalken Shackles, take control of the Death Toucher, and start attacking. Now we can do more damage than him, but we're at a lower life total, so... And right now he drops Skin Render to get rid of my blocker, so that he can attack without hindrance. But luckily we still have Vidalcan Shackles, so... Here, just use Capsize again. Attack. Drop Winter Orb again. He drops a Stinkweed Imp, which basically has Death Touch, and it also has Dredge. So that's pretty bad. Even if we do kill it, then he'll just dredge up a bunch of creatures maybe, and then possibly reanimate them. Here I just go ahead and capsize his mirror, so just not to take too much damage. And I end up having to use Ancient Tomb, but I figure it's a good investment for long term, so that the damage doesn't add up. And here we top deck Karn, which is one of the win conditions in the deck. So I just go ahead and exile that Stinkweed Imp, so we can attack with our creatures. And he has to respond to Karn, otherwise he's pretty much dead. So I figure I'd just keep capsizing his blockers, or sorry, his attackers, so that he can't kill Karn. But here, he goes ahead and uses Clever Impersonator. Now this guy can copy any land permanent, so that means he can copy Karn, and that's pretty bad. So I decide to, at this point, use Mana Drain, and he's completely tapped out. And he figures that since I have Karn out, and he has almost no mana, then it's time for the game to end. So overall, a good game. And yeah, Vendilion Clique is probably one of the best control commanders I've ever used. Besides Orloro and Tasigur, if you want to build a 1v1 mono blue deck, I recommend this commander highly.